When you think of most fantasy anime for the most part, you usually think of this one hero who's kind of like trying to defeat the ultimate evil, right? Well, what if I were to flip the script a little bit and say that our main protagonist in this case was actually the bad guy? And what if I were to tell you that the bad guy in this case was the devil himself? With me so far? Great, but what if I were to tell you that the devil actually takes on a human form and it has only limitations to human abilities, which don't have any sort of magic or influence at all, and he has to go out and earn some money, but with his lack of credentials, is only able to get a job at a fast food restaurant? That's right, guys, we are talking about the devil is a part-timer. Let's get into this one. So even with this crazy premise, The Devil is a Part-Timer is a 13-episode anime that's pretty much a comedy and fantasy anime that's centered around, yes, our main protagonist, who just happens to be Satan. Now Satan, no pun intended, is hell-bent on taking over all of the islands of Ente Isla, which is kind of like this other realm, otherworldly type of thing, where you have different island nations that are all kind of like next to each other. You have several different pockets of people that populate a lot of these islands, and again, these aren't like small islands, they're kind of actually massive, but you have a lot of civilizations that surround like this one central island which Satan is located. And they're basically being oppressed by him and his evil regime. And in order to combat his evil forces and whatnot, there's a church that comes up with a hero by the name of Emilia that makes an attempt to go out and stop him. So Satan and his 4 generals engage Emilia and the church forces here in several different battles, to which Satan ultimately ends up losing. As Emilia and her band of heroes eventually make their way over to Satan's castle, they kind of corner him into a spot to which he is ultimately defeated, but then he opens up a portal into another world to which he escapes with his general Alciel. And once he goes through this portal, that's where all the shenanigans begin, because he ends up in the human world and everything just gets a little bit more crazy from there. He finds out that all of his powers are gone. Everything that he had from his celestial power to all the other stuff that's going on with his influence, absolutely gone. 100% he is just a human, and so is his general Alciel. But here's the thing, in order to actually get anywhere in the human world, you need 2 things, money and status, which he has absolutely none at this point. And the only jobs that they are qualified for in the human world really is just crew members at a fast food restaurant. So as Satan sets up in a local fast food restaurant as a crew member, we find out that Emilia the hero actually follows him to this world. And from there, that's where the story really starts to take off. This show is based off a manga written by Satoshi Wagahara starting from February 2012 and continuing even into the present day. Currently it's licensed from Funimation and it's available for streaming in North America on Netflix of all platforms. And Netflix is actually where I had the pleasure of watching this because, oh my god, it actually is, no pun intended, a hell of a good time. And without further ado, let's get started with our main cast of characters. So first up, we have Satan himself, who is now going by the name of, in the human worlds, Sado Mao. And Satan, yes, you guessed it, is our main protagonist, and essentially put, he is extremely powerful in the Ente Isla world. He is essentially the top demon that's just absolutely taken over the entire world. But at the same time, he is soundly defeated by the hero Emilia. Following his defeat from Emilia, he does open that portal here and there to another dimension, but then ends up in the human world. And again, as I mentioned beforehand, he finds out that, yeah, he can only do so much over here in the human world without establishing himself with, like, money and status first. And even in the human world, he's found out that he's lost his powers and that he's taken on a human body, but he still does have a little bit of his celestial powers still in reserve, to which he kind of saves just in case of emergencies. But okay, so he starts out by trying to get a crew member position over at the local fast food restaurant, which happens to be named McRonald's. So as far as his form is concerned, he takes on this late teens, early 20s kind of male character who looks rather handsome, actually. We find out too that, no surprise, male protagonist in anime, a lot of the ladies actually like him. But despite his evil ways and his charming appearance over here in the human world, he's taken kind of like a little bit of a step back from the evil overlord that he is, choosing rather to be kind of like a model example type of person for everybody else. Thus kind of like putting himself into hiding here and there from the rest of humanity where they don't suspect a thing. That is until our next main character, Emilia, emerges over here from the Ente Isla worlds as a human being too. Emilia is the hero of the church who has essentially followed Satan into the human worlds to also end the job here and there too of defeating him and his evil forces. We end up finding out that she's lost her powers in addition to also Satan and his generals, in this other world, and it's one of those things where it adds an interesting dynamic to the equation. Now, her backstory is a tragic one. Her father was a human and her mother was essentially an archangel, and it's one of those things where even though she's got celestial powers of her own, she is unable to stop Satan and all of his evil forces from destroying her village and a lot of the people in it. Now, she's recruited by the church pretty much against her will. It's actually going out and using her celestial powers to lead their forces against Satan's dark forces. And even after the almost final victory against Satan, she still follows him to try to finish the job in the human world here and there and try to vanquish him. But even as she finds out that she's lost her powers in her human form, she does take on a telemarketing position and vows to kind of watch Satan and observe him and eventually take her revenge. And then let's go into our next main character, Alciel, who is essentially one of Satan's generals. Alciel, who's also known in the human world as Shiro Ashia, starts out as Satan's general, but when they do get to the human world and they discover that they don't have their powers anymore, he takes on the role of the housekeeper. And his fierce devotion to Satan actually drives him to do so many different things, like take a couple of other extra part-time jobs here and there on the side in order to make sure that they can pay their bills every single month. So he essentially is the guy who keeps things in order at home, even if it means, yes, cooking, cleaning, and scrubbing and doing all kinds of different things in order to make sure that things stay in order. He's very proud of nature. He won't let his king be living in such foul conditions and all of the good stuff, so he does what he can in order to make sure that life is bearable for the most part. And then we get into our next main character, who is Chiyo Sasaki, and she is wonderful. She is essentially a local high school student who also works at the local McDonald's with Satan, and she doesn't know that, yes, that he is the devil himself. At least at first. At least at first she doesn't know it. She finds out, well, I shouldn't say it, but okay. High school student, some people might even say fan servicey kind of character for the most part. Her part in the story actually comes to a bit of a head here and there when she receives a signal from somebody who intended to send this to Emilia from Ente Isla. Instead, they send it to her. She eventually finds out about Satan and Emilia and all their different powers and whatnot, and about the other world as well, and she becomes entangled in this mess as well. But despite this fact, she shows bravery in trying to keep a level head with all the crazy things that are happening around her, and still kind of keeps it together for the most part. And even though she has feelings for the devil for the most part, Satan himself, she kind of keeps him grounded. She kind of gives him purpose and reason to care for the most part. And that's what makes her character so interesting, is the fact that she's able to ground Satan and have him empathize with humanity even a little bit. And then we get into our next main character, who is Lucifer over here, who goes by the name of Hanzo Uchiwahara in the human world. Now, Lucifer comes onto the scene in some sort of like an explosive fashion as he teams up with a rogue member of the church and trying to take Satan down, but at the same time he is one of Satan's former generals. And even though he takes on the form of like this teenage boy for the most part, he's seen as kind of the tech guru of the group. So he's very good with computers, he's very good with doing searches and calling up different things here and there too. But he also has a little bit of a vice in the form of online gaming. Kind of reminds me of like YouTubers or streamers or something like that. But even with his carefree nature, he still is a devoted member of Satan's team for the most part, even if they had a little bit of a rocky reunion of sorts. And now, let's talk about the plot and the storyline of this anime. So again, the show starts out with our main protagonist Satan as he's ousted from his castle by Emilia and her band of heroes. And essentially, yes, he goes into the human world to try to escape. And Satan is only able to escape with one of his generals, Alciel, as they make their way into the human world, and there they discover that yes, they've taken on human forms. And these human forms essentially don't have any powers. There's no celestial power, no magic, no influence whatsoever. And yet they find out that yes, they need to go get some jobs and establish themselves. And as Satan is trying to make friends with Chihiro-chan and trying to make sure that he can establish himself at the local McDonald's as a crew member, he runs into Emilia the hero, also in her human form. And right there, she vows revenge against him and tries to fight him, but a police officer ends up stopping her and trying to make sure that he can break them up. So Emilia essentially vows revenge against him, but for the time being decides to observe him instead and try to make sure that he doesn't do anything wrong. She studies him from afar, and if he crosses the line here and there too with trying to make sure that he can spread his evil influence all over humanity, she will then act and try to kill him. As constant threat here and there, although it's looming over Satan for the most part, doesn't actually faze him too much. What's weird is that he starts to develop a little bit of empathy for humans and actually starts to kind of like fall into place here and there in his human form. He starts to actually like his job. He actually starts to do a great job for the most part and then gets promoted to assistant manager. And even as he's climbing the ladder here and there with his place of work, Emilia still treats him with a whole lot of suspicion as she's watching him from afar, but she finds out that he is not really doing anything wrong. What follows after this point is a whole host of different episodes here and there, which start to become like little slice of life type anime type things where they're just kind of going about their regular day for the most part, until some natural disasters start to happen. And we find out that these natural disasters are caused by Lucifer as he's followed Satan into the human worlds. But he does have help. A couple of rogue members of the church have actually also followed Lucifer here and there into the human worlds in order to try to vanquish Satan too. We also see a couple of battles from a few rogue members of the church as they make their way into the human worlds. But what's interesting about this anime is that Emilia the hero goes under a little bit of a transformation throughout. And even though she's vowed to bring Satan to justice, at least at first, it's one of those things where as she's observing him, finds out that he has a whole lot of compassion and empathy towards humans. At first, she treats this with so much suspicion for the most part. I mean, who wouldn't? This is the guy who essentially destroyed your entire village and every bit of your home. But despite the fact that she's acting pretty much as a check against the devil himself, the church still doesn't seem to trust her for the most part. So they send a bunch of agents here and there, and there's a couple of ones that kind of act on their own here and there to try to bring him to justice. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of battles that ensue. And although I won't spoil it for you for the most part, the final battle that does lead up to this has you kind of questioning who is good and who is bad for the most part. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. But for now, let's talk about the production quality and the soundtrack of this anime. For an anime that's debuted in about 2013, the production quality is fairly good. I give this show good marks for its art stylings, sure, but what really got me here and there was the diversity of the character designs. What I did like about the show in comparison with some others out there is the fact that a lot of the main characters are very easily distinguished. And this is a good thing only because a lot of different anime shows, you have a lot of characters wearing the same school uniform whose only defining characteristics are different colors of hair and different personalities and quirks. But not this anime. You can tell the distinctions between each one of the characters, and I did like the fact that they weren't all in high school just because. The soundtrack does a good job of acting as kind of filler for the background noise here and there with the different situations that they're in, whether they be battle sequences or slice of life type of things. But there's one track in particular that really stood out to me. And that track was actually the show's ending track, Hataraku maou-sama. And this song isn't exactly an epic choir hymnal piece here and there that's just absolutely in your face and is part of a battle sequence. It's rather just sort of like a mellow rock type of vibe here and there that kind of brings you down from all the action. But this song is actually a really cool track. I mean, whenever I play it, I usually think of myself as like a lemonade or something kind of sitting by the pool, kind of suntanning for the most part. But the visuals that also accompany it during the end credits scene when it plays are absolutely stellar. And now, let's talk about my conclusion. So after much deliberation and ordering a large fry to go with my Big Mig from McDonald's, I award The Devil is a Part-Timer with a score of 2.2 out of 5, placing it into my apprentice class. And as part of my apprentice class, I would only recommend watching this anime if you have a little bit of free time. But let me explain why. Despite the fact that the show had pretty good qualities for the most part, there's a couple of things that I had a little bit of a problem with. The show for me suffered a lot from different pacing issues. I mean, it's one of those things where I kind of wanted it to pick up in certain spots where it should have, but it kind of didn't. And there were other kind of parts here and there that kind of seemed like the comedy was forced a little bit. And it's one of those things where it tried to be funny for the sake of being funny. I also actually had a little bit of a problem with Chiho in the show, and the reason why I say that is because it seems like she was just the fan service aspect of the show, and eventually, like towards the middle of the entire season, her role in the entirety of the universe just kind of really greatly diminished. Now again, this may not be true of the manga. She may have had a bigger role in the manga for the most part and might have had to ramp up to it, but during the first season at least, she was kind of put on the back burner for the most part and not really doing anything for the second half of the show. And even same kind of thing with Emilia for the most part. I mean, I don't think that the characters were fully explored as much as they should have been, but I think the remedy for that would have been adding additional episodes to the show. Kind of makes you wonder whether or not they actually had the budget to make sure all their characters were very fleshed out for the most part. But even if they didn't, is it still worth a watch? I still believe that it is. So if you're looking for an anime that can make you laugh and give you an enjoyable weekend of watching, I actually would recommend The Devil is a Part-Timer. And that concludes my review today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also leave me a like and a comment down below. And also be sure to check out some of our other anime reviews, as we're going to be getting into a couple of different ones for next week. But I will see you guys soon in the next video. Bye bye!